The text came on a Wednesday afternoon when the week had already wrung me dry. My best friend Karen was its typical whirlwind self. Karen, swinger party. Friday. You in? It's gonna be epic. Her suggestion hit me like a sharp note in the middle of monotony. I had just set down my third coffee of the day. Cold, bitter, uninspired, much like my mood. Me. Karen, are you serious? You can't just drop that in casual conversation. She replied with a winking emoji and no further explanation. That was the kind of friend she was. A storm you could either run from or ride out. Against my better judgment, curiosity won. Friday night. The air hummed with the kind of restlessness that begged for something reckless. Karen picked me up in her battered sedan. Her playlist of unapologetic pop hits doing little to ease the nerves knotting my stomach. She was radiant, dressed to kill in a way that made her confidence contagious. I, on the other hand, felt like a mannequin that hadn't been fully assembled. You're going to love this, she promised, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Define love, I retorted, clutching my bag like it was a life preserver. The venue was a sprawling house in a part of town I rarely ventured into. From the outside it looked unassuming, clean, modern, and entirely too quiet. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. My first clue that something was off was the realization that the crowd wasn't as balanced as Karen had hinted. It wasn't 10 women and 10 men mingling over wine and cheese. It was me, Karen, and 6 men. My heart did a little somersault. I wasn't sure if it was excitement, dread, or the too strong vodka cranberry Karen had handed me. Breathe, she whispered, nudging me toward the group. The men were charming, I'll admit. They had a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room, drawing attention without trying. First, it was intoxicating. Every glance felt deliberate, every word charged with subtext. But as the night wore on, the mood shifted. I began to feel like an outsider to my own expectations, a doll in a display case, admired but detached. Karen, of course, was thriving, her laughter a melodic ribbon cutting through the tension. I wish I could tell you that the evening blossomed into something magical, but life isn't a rom-com. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's painful, and sometimes it leaves you questioning everything you thought you wanted. By the end of the night I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It had been an experience, sure, but not one I'd rush to repeat. Karen called it an adventure. I called it a cautionary tale. As we drove home, I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, the city alive with possibility. For the first time in a long time I was grateful for my own bed, my own space, and the simplicity of knowing where I stood. The aftermath of that night lingered like smoke in a room that refused to clear. Karen, as expected, was already planning the next escapade before I'd even unpacked the emotions still swirling inside me. She sent a text the very next morning. Karen. So, what did you think? Fun, right? Let's do it again next month. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Was it fun? Well, that was complicated. My mind flickered back to the sensation of being surrounded, praised and analyzed all at once. It had been thrilling, sure, but also overwhelming, like being on a stage with no script. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on me. It was interesting. Not sure I'm cut out for that scene, though. Karen's reply came instantly. Karen, cut out for it. Girl, it's not an exam. You just show up and vibe. Don't overthink it. Overthinking was my specialty, though. And it didn't help that the evening kept replaying in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about it had thrown me off balance. It wasn't just the setup or the unexpected ratio of men to women. It was the way I'd felt, a mix of vulnerability, curiosity, and unease that didn't sit well. Still, life moved on. Work deadlines loomed, friends made plans, and for a while, the memories of that night faded into the background noise of daily life. Karen, as relentless as ever, didn't let me off the hook completely. Every so often she'd drop a playful, ready for round 2 yet, into our conversations. Then one afternoon she caught me at a moment of weakness. We were grabbing coffee at our favorite spot, the kind of place that made every latte feel like a tiny act of self-care. Karen leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping just enough to make me curious. "There's another party this weekend," she said, stirring her drink as if it were no big deal. "But this one's different. Smaller. More exclusive. I think you'd actually like it." "Karen," I started, already shaking my head. "Hear me out," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "This isn't like the last one. It's less overwhelming. More intimate." "Intimate?" My eyebrows shot up. "Not like that," she clarified with a laugh. "Just trust me." Her assurances didn't exactly fill me with confidence, but the intrigue was hard to ignore. Besides, I'd been in a rut lately, and a part of me, however small, craved the kind of unpredictability that Karen seemed to thrive on. And so, against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing. The night of the party came faster than I expected. Karen picked me up again, her excitement palpable as she hummed along to the radio. This time I'd taken more care with my outfit, a sleek black dress that felt both safe and daring. If I was going to step outside my comfort zone again, I might as well look the part. The venue was entirely different. A cozy loft downtown, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter, more subdued. Soft lighting cast a warm glow, and the music was low enough to allow for actual conversation. It was nice. Inviting, even. Karen wasted no time introducing me to the group. A handful of people this time, a mix of friendly faces and warm smiles. There were no overwhelming crowds, no sense of being the center of attention. For the first time I felt like I could actually relax. As the evening unfolded, I found myself engaged in easy conversations, the kind that reminded me why I'd wanted to try something new in the first place. One of the men, a tall, soft-spoken guy with an easy laugh, caught my attention. His name was Marcus, and he had a way of making me forget about my nerves. "You don't look like someone who comes to these often," he said at one point, his tone more curious than accusatory. "That obvious, huh?" I replied, sipping my drink. He smiled, leaning slightly closer. "Not in a bad way. You just seem thoughtful. Like you're still deciding what you think about all this." I laughed, a little embarrassed by how accurate his observation was. "You're not wrong." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady but not intimidating. "Well, that's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's good to take a step back and really think about what you want." It was a simple statement, but it struck a chord. Maybe that was the problem all along. I hadn't figured out what I wanted from any of this. The rest of the night was surprisingly pleasant. No drama, no overwhelming moments, just good company and an easy rhythm. When Karen and I finally left, I felt lighter, like I'd reclaimed a small part of myself. On the drive home, she glanced at me, her grin wide and knowing. "So, better than last time." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. "Yeah, Karen, better." By the time Monday rolled around, I felt like I'd finally struck a balance. The second party had been manageable, enjoyable even. It was just the nudge I needed to ease my way into something different without feeling like I was completely out of my depth. But Karen, bless her relentless heart, had other ideas. It started with a casual text. "Karen, guess what? Another invite. Friday. You're coming." I stared at my phone, the words taunting me. After everything, I wasn't sure if I was ready to dive back in. The first party had left me rattled. The second had been a welcome reprieve, and now I wasn't sure where I stood. I don't know, Karen. Maybe I'll sit this one out." Her reply was almost immediate. "Karen, girl, don't make me come drag you out of your apartment. This one's going to be amazing. Promise." I sighed, knowing she wouldn't let it go. Karen had a way of pulling me out of my shell, but this time, I wondered if I was letting her lead me too far. By Friday, my resolve had wavered enough for me to find myself once again standing in front of my closet, deliberating over what to wear. Karen had assured me this party would be different, more like a private gathering, with a curated guest list and an air of exclusivity. I settled on a dark green dress that hugged my frame without feeling too revealing. It was a statement, but a subtle one. Karen picked me up as usual, her energy contagious as she raved about the venue. A chic penthouse with panoramic views of the city. "This is next level," she said, practically bouncing in her seat. "Trust me, you're going to love it." The penthouse was as stunning as she'd described. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering cityscape, and the decor was elegant but understated. There was a warmth to the space, a sense of intimacy that set it apart from the previous gatherings. As we stepped inside, I couldn't help but notice the distinct change in atmosphere. The guests were polished, their laughter soft and their movements deliberate. This wasn't a raucous crowd. This was something quieter, something charged. Karen disappeared almost immediately, swept up in a wave of familiar faces. I lingered near the bar, sipping a glass of wine and scanning the room. It didn't take long for someone to approach, a man with sharp features and a disarming smile. "First time here?" he asked, his tone friendly but laced with curiosity. I nodded, feeling a flicker of nerves. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled, leaning slightly against the bar. "Not at all. Just thought I'd introduce myself before you got swept away by the madness." I smiled despite myself. "Thanks for the warning." "I'm Rebecca," he interrupted, his grin widening. Blink. "How'd you know that?" He held up his phone, the invite list glowing on the screen. "Karen made sure everyone knew who to look out for. Said you're the diamond in the rough." I groaned, feeling a mix of amusement and embarrassment. "Of course she did." The man laughed, his gaze warm. "Liam. And don't worry, we're not all as intense as Karen." The conversation flowed easily after that, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't drowning in the unfamiliar. Liam had a way of making the room feel smaller, his words steadying the noise around us. As the night wore on, I found myself relaxing. The crowd was engaging, the energy just right. But there was a shift, subtle at first, like a low hum building in the background. The guests began to mingle more closely, their movements slower, their laughter quieter. It was as if the room had collectively decided to lean into the tension, to embrace the unspoken rules that seemed to govern these gatherings. Liam noticed my hesitation, his expression softening. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," he said, his tone firm but kind. "That's the one rule everyone here respects." I nodded, grateful for the reassurance. As the evening unfolded, I stayed close to Liam, his presence a steady anchor. He didn't push, didn't pry, just stayed, his calm energy grounding me as I navigated the unfamiliar. When Karen finally reappeared, her face flushed with excitement, I was ready to leave. "You're bailing already," she teased, but there was no malice in her tone. "I think I've had my fill," I said with a small smile. Karen hugged me tightly, her voice low. "Proud of you, Bex. You're getting there." A week after the penthouse party, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. In the span of a month, Karen had dragged me into a world I never thought I'd be part of, a world of intrigue, tension, and occasional chaos. And somehow, despite the initial discomfort, I wasn't entirely running from it anymore. But just as I was starting to feel like I had a handle on things, Karen threw me another curveball. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice brimming with excitement. "I've got something special for us this time," she said, skipping the usual small talk. "It's not a party, it's more like a private retreat. Very exclusive. Very low-key." The word exclusive set off a quiet alarm in my head. "Karen," I said cautiously, "what exactly are we talking about here?" "You'll love it," she assured me. "It's at this gorgeous estate an hour out of the city. Just a small group, super chill. Trust me, you'll thank me later." Every instinct told me to say no. But Karen's persistence was relentless, and a part of me, foolishly perhaps, wanted to believe her. So, Saturday afternoon, I found myself in her car, heading toward what she called the ultimate experience. The estate came into view after a winding drive through lush greenery, and I had to admit it was breathtaking. The house stood like a jewel in the middle of the forest, its large windows reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Inside, the atmosphere was even more intimate than the penthouse party. The attendees were few, but their presence was commanding. They moved with a quiet confidence, their conversations subdued but purposeful. Karen quickly disappeared into the crowd, leaving me to navigate the space on my own. I wandered through the house, taking in the elegant decor and the soft hum of music. It wasn't long before someone approached me, a woman this time, her smile warm and disarming. "You must be Rebecca," she said, extending a hand. "Karen's told us all about you." "Oh, great," I said, shaking her hand and trying not to roll my eyes. She laughed, her gaze steady. "Don't worry, nothing embarrassing. Emma, let me show you around." Emma was a natural host, effortlessly making me feel at ease as she guided me through the estate. She introduced me to a few other guests, each interaction more comfortable than the last. By the time we reached the outdoor terrace, I felt a flicker of gratitude for Karen's persistence. The terrace was stunning, strung with soft lights that glowed against the night sky. A few guests were gathered near a fire pit, their laughter blending with the crackle of the flames. It was here that I met Daniel. He was seated at the edge of the group, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, taking in everything around him. When Emma introduced us, he stood and offered a firm handshake. "Nice to meet you, Rebecca," he said, his voice smooth and steady. We talked for a while, our conversation meandering from casual topics to deeper ones. Daniel had a way of making you feel like the only person in the room, his attention unwavering and his words thoughtful. As the night progressed, I found myself drawn to him, not in the heady, overwhelming way I'd felt before, but in a quieter, more grounded way. But, of course, nothing ever stays simple. Around midnight, the energy in the house began to shift. The laughter grew softer, the conversations more hushed. The guests moved closer together, their interactions tinged with a subtle but unmistakable charge. Daniel noticed my hesitation and leaned in slightly, his voice low. "You okay?" I nodded, though my nerves were beginning to fray. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," he said, echoing Liam's words from the penthouse. It was a simple reassurance, but it was enough to steady me. For the next hour, I watched as the night unfolded, staying on the edges of the group. The atmosphere was electric, but it wasn't suffocating. It was like standing in the eye of a storm, calm, but acutely aware of the chaos swirling around you. When I finally decided to leave, Daniel walked me to the door. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his smile warm but not expectant. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "Maybe," I said finally. "Thanks for everything." His smile widened and he nodded. "Take care, Rebecca." In the weeks that followed the retreat, I found myself replaying the events of that night in my mind. Not just the conversations or the subtle electric moments, but the choices I'd made and how they'd shaped my experience. Karen, as always, was quick to check in. "So," she asked one evening over a shared bottle of wine, "what's the verdict? Are you finally seeing the magic in these adventures?" I swirled my glass thoughtfully, watching the deep red liquid catch the light. "It's complicated," I said finally. "It's not that I regret going. I just think it's not as simple as you make it sound." Karen tilted her head, her expression curious. "What do you mean?" I began slowly. "That it's not just about showing up and having fun. There's a lot more to it. Figuring out boundaries, navigating expectations, deciding what you're comfortable with. It's intense, and it's not something you can just jump into without thinking." She nodded, her usual exuberance tempered by something softer. "I get that," she said. "But don't you think it's worth it? To push yourself, to explore, to see what's out there?" I considered her words, weighing them against my own feelings. "Sometimes, yeah," I admitted. "But not everything's for everyone. And that's okay." The truth was, I'd learned a lot about myself over the past few weeks. I'd learned that curiosity was a powerful motivator, but that it needed to be balanced with self-awareness. I'd learned the importance of setting boundaries and sticking to them. Most of all, I'd learned that while it's good to step outside your comfort zone, it's also okay to recognize when something doesn't feel right. Karen raised her glass, her smile warm. To figuring it all out, she said, clinking her glass against mine. To figuring it all out, I echoed, feeling a quiet sense of closure. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Daniel, about Liam, about the strangers whose paths had crossed mine in such unexpected ways. Each encounter had taught me something, shaped me in ways I hadn't anticipated. And though I wasn't sure if I'd ever return to that world, I knew I'd carry those lessons with me. Sometimes it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And this journey, for all its twists and turns, had shown me a part of myself I hadn't known before.